Hey everybody, Dave here. Today we're going to talk about code stages again. But this time I'm going to let you see how much of a struggle it could be to do something that's actually rather simple, and how I go about trying to troubleshoot what I don't understand or what I'm doing wrong. So I don't code on a daily basis. So simple things in C# are not necessarily really easy for me to remember. If I did it every single day, it'd probably just come second nature to me. But you'll see in the video that I try to solve what, especially if you're a programmer, you'll say like, that's actually kind of simple, Dave. Well, I'm going to leave it here for anybody else who may want to learn from it. So when you get to that part of the video, you're going to see me stare at the screen for a little while, trying to figure it out. It's dealing with converting of data types, trying to separate out some code, and you'll see in the comments, you'll see 4 ints and 4 double. You'll just watch for this and you'll see that it takes me a bit to figure out that the example given on Stack Overflow is actually 2 examples in the same sort of snippet of code, and you're not supposed to use both, you're supposed to use one or the other. Eventually I figure that out and I edit the code and we're good by the end. The main thing you want to learn from this, I guess a couple things. I do point out that you need to make sure you have the namespace import for whatever class you're using. These words that I'm using, get used to them. Google it if you're not sure what I'm referring to. It's important to get used to things like namespace import. The references, classes, objects, methods. These are all words that you want to get familiar with if you're going to use code stages. And then I also show Stack Overflow and Microsoft documentation. The Microsoft docs are super, super helpful when you want to know something, but it's not really easy necessarily to find where the answer is until you already know the name of the class and the method you want to use. That's where Stack Overflow gets me. Here's the code that should work, and then I go to the documentation for Microsoft that's related to that code, and then I help myself understand it, and then eventually I fix the code. So enjoy the video. Hope you learned something. But primarily, this is just going to be watching me figure something out. And hopefully you'll just feel better for it if you've ever struggled trying to understand something kind of simple. I think that the first place to start whenever you, especially if you are first beginning coding, beyond just using expressions and stuff like that, you'll probably want to start with other people's code. Google it, copy the code, paste it in a code stage and try to make it work. That's the fastest way that you're going to get use out of it. Your goal is just functionality. Who cares who wrote it? Who cares where it came from? As long as you're not violating any laws, stealing somebody's code, then it doesn't really matter where it came from or what you started with when you started. That's where I'm coming from with this video. So I am going to actually look for something I've never looked for before. I haven't even come up with the concept yet. I just know that what I want to show is what do I do when I go look for code, and then when I grab that code, what do I do with it in Blue Prism to troubleshoot errors and stuff. So I'm going to go for something kind of simple, and we'll see where it goes. So first, I'm going to go make a code stage, where I want to put my code. We're going to use the same object that I used last time and the same process. So we'll do the same thing really quickly that we did last time. I'm going to go into a process, and this is the stage we used last time. So I'm going to drag this off to the side and just unlink it so that we're not using it. Well, yeah. I'm just going to copy and paste it and then connect it in. This is actually going to be the new code stage. So I'm going to create a new action, a new code stage, and then I'll come back and update this. So we'll call this stubbed out new action call. This is in the process. And I'm just going to close this, go into our objects, code stages objects. I'm going to create a new action, and we'll call this one. Oh, so here's where we should think about what do we want to be able to do. We get some kind of environment variable like the username. What's something that I commonly want to do? We like format a date. We could convert a data table into JSON or XML. Boy, this is tough. I don't feel like I guess I just need a use case. So fun code to use in .NET. Useful code fragments, C#. Let's say that we want to take a screenshot of is that what we want? Let's say that what we wanted, honestly, I had a hard time thinking of something that I needed to do in code that I couldn't already do in Blue Prism with an existing expression or existing function or one of the actions available in the VBOs, the best thing I come up with is, what if I want to generate a random number? Because I also don't want this to be very complex. So how would I get a random number in Blue Prism? Pretty sure there's not an existing function, or at least with the provided VBOs and stuff, like there's no action for that. If there is, just don't tell me. Let's pretend like there's not, because this is really just an exercise in how do I go find code and use it. So I'm creating a new action called generate random number in range. Yeah, generate it within a given range, because I don't want to just have any random number. I want it to be between 1 and 10, or between 1 and 100, or between -1,000 and +1,000, whatever it is. So we're going to do that, and I'm going to drop a code stage here. Just connect it. Random number. Get random numbers, what I'll call this. We already know that we want to give 2 inputs, and they'll probably be of type number. We'll call it lower limit and upper limit. The outputs will be random number. Store in random number. We'll get this from lower limit, which doesn't exist yet. And upper limit. I'll create both of these here. Rename lower limit and upper limit. All right. And then this will be an input. This will be an input. This will be an output. So we'll add that to the output. Random number. It's going to get from random number. The start will be 2, lower limit, upper limit. Yeah, I could probably just call these from and to. Oh well. Oops. Number. Okay. Okay. All right, so we're going to get a random number from here. We'll go ahead and publish this. And inside here is where we're going to put our code. Now, how do we find this code? Well, you could try to go to the Microsoft documentation and try to find it, which you could probably Google for, and it probably wouldn't be that bad. You could probably find it that way. I think it's the nerdy way to do it, for sure, is to go to the Microsoft.net documentation and just try to scour it for what you need and get really familiar with it. But we're going to go the lazy route and just Google how to get a random number in .NET, or specifically in C#, because that's the language we're using here. Given a lower limit and upper limit, we want a random number. Let's open up Chrome. Okay, and let's Google how to get a random number in C# in range. Okay, how to generate random numbers from a range in C#. Stack Overflow is our friend, so let's go look at that. Okay, this question already has an answer here. Okay, so I'm not even going to read this. I'm going to go to produce a random number in a range using C#. That sounds like what we want. This guy says, how do I go about producing random numbers within a range? 234 people liked the question, and then the answer, 374 people liked, so this is probably what we want. This person says, you can try here. Usually when people do this, let me just tell you this right now. Here's what you're going to come across a lot of times. This person, while they are maybe not assuming too much, they do assume you know what you're doing to some degree with code. They're probably giving you a somewhat working version of the code, but it is also likely just an example that you want to tweak yourself. The other thing that they'll do is, and I think this is fair enough, they're also assuming that you know about namespace imports. So I'm going to copy this, and I do not remember if this is by default going to work. So let's find out. I'm going to copy the code and go back to my code stage, go to the code, paste it, and what the only thing I want to change here, so right now this is where we put our upper and lower limit, it looks like. Wait, int range. Okay, well, I'll have to look at this. I have not looked at this at all before now. So it does seem like a weird, wait, this is, right. So this looks like it'll generate a random number, but then this, ties it to be within the range that we want. Anyways, you might be watching this and going like, Dave, it's obvious. Well, hey, I'm not the most experienced programmer, okay? Don't judge me, all right? So I'm going to click check code. Hopefully, no, okay. Unfortunately, this looks like it's just going to work out of the box. That's unfortunate. So we're going to assign our output. We don't actually want this to be a double, though. Is what comes out of double or next double. Can I do next decimal? Well, I have no idea if this is a thing, so I'm just going to change it to be double. We don't actually have to declare, sorry, random number equals, okay, so this is for doubles. That's not the case anymore. All right, system.random does not contain definition for next decimal. Okay, all right, so you can only get doubles. Fair enough, fair enough. So it looks like we'll have to change this. I think their code was something like double. Let's make sure that still works. It says output parameter must be assigned, right? Let's see if it throws an error if we just put the value in there. Random number equals r double. Seems like it would. You can't implicitly convert. So here's a common problem that you'll come across is casting or converting between values, data types. We might be able to just go like r double dot 2 decimal. No. Double does not contain do 2 decimal 2. All right, fine. Okay, how to convert double to decimal in C#. Convert.to decimal. So there's several ways to convert between the data types, but this will be fine for our purposes. I believe if the conversion doesn't work in this case, it'll just set the value to 0, but whatever. So it's actually going to be convert.to decimal. Where's my examples? 2 decimal. Convert.to decimal, and it takes. Look, right, okay, right there, 2 decimals. So convert.to decimal will put the double in between. All right. So convert.to decimal r double right here. If I've just confused you, don't worry. This last part's really, we're just trying to make it work. My goal is to show you how to implement the beginning part. And the only problem that we ran into here is that I guess the number we get out of whatever this code's doing, it's a type of double, and we need it to be decimal to match the Blue Prism data type number. So will it work now? Okay. Now we don't have our upper and lower limit in here, but we should still be able to run this and get a random number. Okay. Woo. Oh, right. 86 point. So I thought that was a huge number. That's a random number between 1 and 100. So let's see if we can use our upper and lower limit. We'll leave it at 100. So we're going to go back in and change the code to use and equals r dot next. So it gets one between 0 and 100. Int range equals 100. Double, r double equals, so random double equals r dot next double. Let's see. I don't think we need this, and I don't think we need this. So we're just getting a random integer, I suppose. So r dot next 0. So we want our lower limit here, lower limit, and upper limit. All right. So we probably need to do to int. Convert dot to convert dot to int. Wait, I mean to decimal. No, we're right. We're still right. We still want to convert it to a decimal. And we can just pass it. Okay. I got confused. Let's go back in here. This is going to be number dot to decimal still, but instead of it being r double, we're doing r int. Okay. Now, we should still get a value between, wait, what? Do we have errors? Can't do that. Did I leave a semicolon off somewhere? No. Oh, I'm an idiot. So you don't put the brackets. That my mind just went full on Blue Prism just then. Argument to cannot convert from decimal to int. Oh, okay. Okay, we have to take our decimals. Does this have to be r.next? All right, here's where maybe you'd get to, right? I wanted to show you what happens to me sometimes is I want to pretend like I can just go copy some code off the internet, paste it in here and just like work with it. Sometimes you got to look up what Microsoft says about that code. And I think there were some links in that Stack Overflow article about that. But I think you'd probably do the same thing. You look at this and you go, I can read these. These are English words, some of them. I think I can handle this on my own. Well, I can tell you, I have done, while I'm not super experienced at programming, I have done a lot. And I've worked with a lot of different classes and methods and stuff in various programming languages. But I'm still stuck on this really silly, probably easy issue. I can tell you, I definitely know how to make this work. I can fix those issues we just last saw. But the point is that I think that the best thing for us to do is go look at random. So we can see that this is a thing right here. Let me break this down really quick. This is a data type this is a type of a class in .NET, random. Microsoft made it. I know that, but there's not any real reason you'd know that. But this has to come from somewhere. You can't just declare a data type of something and somebody not have defined it ahead of time. This is one of those things that's I think just part of the math class, I guess. Maybe. I'm not sure. This is a name we're giving it to. We give R, call it whatever you want, call it random. Random R equals, and this is where we initialize, instantiate. I think we're instantiating, right? Or are we initializing? Anyways, new. This is creating a new object of the class type random. And you have to do that because. So this is the power horse behind creating a random number. I'm going to look up .NET random. Maybe I'll go .NET random number. Okay, random class. Let me go look at this. It is inside of the namespace system. And so let me just go show you really quick. The reason that we can work with this at all is because in initialize, in the code options, we have namespace imports of system. If I removed this and click OK, and then I do error checking, it should say something like, here, this is perfect. Compiler error at line 1. The type or namespace name random could not be found. Are you missing a using directive or an assembly reference? So that's it. That's that. Whenever you get something like this, it means that there is a class name or something that you are referencing that's not defined anywhere that Blue Prism can find. And that's where if you go look it up, right? You go type random class or random, type random, whatever, .NET, go to the Microsoft documentation for it. You'll see the namespace here. It says it's in system. So I can just go back to Blue Prism and I can go to the code options and add system. Now, it's also important that the DLL is referenced, but let's just ignore that for now. So system, okay. And now I'll hit the errors checker. And we have other errors, but that one about missing the namespace reference, or the assembly reference or whatever, that's not here anymore. We have other issues to deal with. So let me go back to this random class. So we want to understand what this thing is doing. It says represents a pseudo-random number generator, which is a device that produces a sequence of numbers that meet certain statistical requirements for randomness. Ooh. All right, so it's not quite a random number, but it's good enough for our purposes, is what it's saying. We want to see their examples for generating a new random. This is vb.net. It's another thing, whenever you're looking at the Microsoft documentation, depending on what class it is, you'll look, well, it's got all 4 of them here. So we might see C++, C#, F#, or VB. In our case, we're looking at C#, and so if you click that, it will adjust the page to show you examples of code and whatnot that are just for C#. So we've got, let's see, here is our random. Here's our, this, basically the same thing as this line right here. Random R equals new random. I know it looks a little bit different because they're using, they're not, imagine if this said random rand equals new random. But what we want to know is what do we get out of that? So instantiate a random number generator using system supplied value as seed. Okay, right. So this is creating a new random object. It doesn't actually create a new random number for us. This is not a number. We have to call a method on that object. So we have to scroll down. I wonder if there's a next decimal, or wait, didn't we try that? I think we tried that. So here's what I can do over to the side. This is a random class. We can go down to methods and you can see, okay, so here's what we have. We can do next, which probably is an integer, right? Returns a random integer. Next bytes, it returns, okay, fills the element of a specified array of bytes with random numbers. Okay, that's more complicated. Next double. Okay, the main difference between next double and next is that next double will have a dot, like a decimal next to it, right? So if we wanted something more specific than an integer, then we use this. Otherwise, we can just use next. So let's go back over to our code, and we understand that better now. I can go to my code, and this is not giving me a number. I have to call the next method on it. So let's do this random and make it a little bit easier for us to understand. Random object. How about that? That'll make it a little bit easier. Random object. So random object dot next. We're going to use our lower limit and upper limit, but we have to first give it integers to work with. So before we do that, let's take our decimals and convert them to integers. I think this will probably work. So lower limit. So we actually want to create int lower int equals our lower limit. So convert dot to int 32. Will that work? Cannot convert. Is this line 5? So it doesn't have a problem with line 3, right? Line 3, line 5, 5, 8, 5. Let's copy this and do it again for the upper int. Convert dot to int 32. There's a better way to do this, but pretend like I didn't say that. I'm not making this complex. Upper limit. Okay, so here's what we're doing. We are creating an integer, a lower int, and an upper integer, upper int. The reason we have to do it this way is that Blue Prism number is in decimal. So when we take it from the input, right, this is a decimal. We have to turn it into an integer. So decimal will be 1.01. That's a decimal. An integer is just 1. So what we're doing is taking that lower limit, which could be 1.01, upper limit, which could be 100.5, and we're turning it into an integer. So it's going to just chop off anything that's after it. It's going to become 1 and 100 if you were to provide those two values I just mentioned. Now we can provide the integers as inputs here. Lower int, upper int, random int here. This is not right. Yeah, so we're creating an integer random object, which is right here. We're calling on a method next. This method takes two arguments, parameters, whatever, lower int and upper int. We will get a random integer here, then we're converting it back into a decimal here, convert.toDecimal. This has actually got to be random int. Okay, right? We'll get a decimal. That should be a random number between 1 and 100, or whatever we provide to it. Let's make sure we don't have any errors. We have no errors. Let's step over this. Okay, so we got a random number 76. Let's change the upper limit to be like a larger number. Reset, step. Okay, so we got a larger number. That's actually really confusing. Let's say our upper limit is like 50. Okay, so we got a random number between 50. If we were to run this over and over again, we would always get a random number between 1 and 50. I'm sure I've been very confusing, but what I wanted to show you is that this is kind of a trial and error thing. Over time, you get better at it, but let me just suggest, spend a little bit of time trying to work on the code on your own, but then after you can't figure it out, go Google it. And what I was really hoping would have happened is that our example code here would have required me to figure out what namespace import this was. Back to namespace import, this right here. So this, like if you're going to use a certain method or a certain class or whatever that method or that class is defined in the .NET framework or in the .NET library here, you have to have whatever it comes from has to be defined in the code options over here. It's got to match up. That's going to take some learning. I'm going to try to, right after this, I'm going to try to do this again, but one that will definitely require a namespace import that doesn't exist in my object already. Because when you create an object, it automatically is going to have system.data, system.drawing. It's always going to have those. So if there's a method you're trying to call inside of this, you don't have to do anything. It's already there. So it can be a little bit confusing when you come across one that isn't already referenced in here. Okay. Let me save this in range added. Okay, so now we can go back to our process. Generate random number between 1 and 500. Okay, we'll put first number is 1, second number is 500. Lower limit, upper limit. I'm just reusing the date items. That might seem a little bit weird, but I put the other action that we worked on before to the side where you add two numbers, and I'm just reusing the same data items, so that might be a little bit weird. Let me create a new one for random number so that we don't put into answer. All right, and then let's step over this. There we go. We got a random number, 452. I'll reset it again, just make sure that it's always between 1 and 500. It looks like it is. So we're good to go. What did we learn from this? It can be easy to add some code, but it could also be very difficult depending on what you know already about the language and what you're familiar with. A common problem is converting between data types, and then the other common problem is namespace imports to point out where the class exists in the code library that it was originally developed in. And there you go. So I'm going to try to do this again with another example and then post that one when I get a chance. Have fun, and remember, namespace imports are your friend.